My name is Evelyn Evans. I'm 38 years old. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own family, if your achievements were deliberately ignored, if someone spent years turning you into the family's favorite joke, then my story will probably hit closer to home than you expect. For 20 years, at every family gathering, my mother introduced me the exact same way. This is my biggest disappointment. The daughter who never made anything of herself. First, thought she was joking. I'd force a smile. Everyone else would laugh too. But after a few years, I realized it wasn't a joke. It was a strategy. A strategy designed to erase every success, every achievement, every piece of my identity. In the eyes of everyone around me, I graduated near the top of my college class. No one mentioned it. I landed my first professional job. My mom shrugged and said, "It's just an ordinary job." I worked late nights, earned promotions, helped turn struggling businesses around. But to my family, I was always the same girl. The one who never became anything. Last Saturday, my mother celebrated her 65th birthday. The party was held at the Legion Hall in Cedar Falls. Around 60 guests filled the room. Relatives, church friends, old neighbors, and the family members who seemed to show up every year just to judge everyone else's lives. As usual, I sat quietly by myself in a corner, a glass of juice in my hand, silently hoping that maybe this year, my mother wouldn't humiliate me in front of everyone. But I was wrong. Just before they cut the cake, she picked up the microphone. The room fell silent. She began her birthday speech. And suddenly, she walked straight toward me, took my hand, pulled me to the front of the room. Smiling, she looked at her guests and said, "You all know my oldest daughter, don't you?" A few people smiled politely in my direction. My mother paused, then repeated the same sentence, the one that had followed me for 20 years. "This is my biggest disappointment. The daughter who never made anything of herself." The room exploded with laughter. Someone slapped the table. Someone else shook their head with a smirk. My aunt laughed and said, "Evelyn has always been different." My uncle called out, "Maybe next year she'll finally get lucky." Everyone laughed. As always, I stood there in silence. But this time, something inside me didn't break. This time, something woke up. I took one slow, deep breath, turned quietly, and started walking back to my seat. That's when the double doors at the back of the hall slowly opened. Every head turned toward the entrance. An elderly man, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, walked calmly into the room. He looked to be around 72 years old. His face was calm, but there was something about his presence that made several people immediately stand up out of respect. Whispers spread across the room. "What's he doing here? Is that really him? No. It can't be." Even my mother looked toward the doors in surprise. A proud smile slowly appeared on her face. She probably assumed someone that important had come to celebrate her birthday. But he wasn't there for her. He was looking for someone else. His eyes moved slowly from table to table, as if he'd been searching for one particular face for years. His eyes landed on me. A warm smile crossed his face. He immediately walked in my direction. The laughter stopped. The room fell completely silent. The smile slowly disappeared from my mother's face. Stood there, completely confused. He stopped right in front of me, looked into my eyes for a few seconds. Then, with genuine respect, he said, "Ms. Evelyn Evans, I've finally found you." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. The entire hall went silent, and I had no idea that the next 10 minutes wouldn't just end my mother's birthday speech. They would destroy the 20-year story my family had been telling about me. Forever. The entire hall stood frozen. Every eye shifted from the elderly man, me, and back again. My mother forced a polite smile and stepped forward. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake." This is my daughter, Evelyn. She's never really done anything remarkable." The old man smiled calmly. Then, for the first time, he looked directly at my mother. "There's no mistake, ma'am. I've been looking for her for the past 7 years." The room instantly filled with whispers. 7 years? Who is this man? How does he know Evelyn? The color slowly drained from my mother's face. She laughed nervously. "Perhaps you're talking about a different Evelyn." The elderly man reached into his jacket and pulled out an old blue folder. Its edges were worn with age. He opened it and carefully removed several documents. These business plans, these operational improvements, these strategic recommendations. Every one of them was created by Evelyn Evans. I stared silently at the papers, because I recognized them immediately. They were the same handwritten notes I had prepared years earlier while working in a tiny office. I was nothing more than a temporary employee. My salary was modest, had no title, no authority, but every evening, after finishing my assigned work, I'd study the company's biggest problems. Then I'd write down my ideas and slip them into the employee suggestion box. I never knew who actually read them. Then one day, the suggestion box disappeared. I assumed, just like everything else I'd ever done, my work had been ignored. But the truth was very different. The elderly man turned to face the guests. "Most of you know me as a businessman. But here's the truth. There was a time when I was preparing to shut my company down." A wave of shock swept through the room. He continued. "We were losing money every quarter. Dozens of our 139 stores were on the verge of closing. Every executive meeting ended in failure. Then one day, I found an anonymous suggestion. There was no name on it. Just one sentence. The problem isn't the people. It's the system." I lowered my eyes. "Those words were mine," he continued. "After that, new suggestions started appearing every week. How to improve our supply chain. How to eliminate unnecessary expenses. How to train employees more effectively. How to rebuild customer trust. Every recommendation was practical. And every time we implemented one, the results exceeded our expectations." Several guests looked at one another in disbelief. My aunt whispered, "Evelyn, did all of that?" My mother immediately interrupted. "No. That's impossible. She doesn't know the first thing about running a business." The elderly man didn't even acknowledge her objection. "Is it?" He pulled out another document. The top, printed clearly in black ink, was my name, Evelyn Evans, and underneath it, my own handwriting. He held the document high for everyone to see. Years later, we compared the handwriting with our archived records. That's when we discovered every anonymous proposal had been written by the same person. Then he looked directly at me. "And that person is Evelyn Evans." The entire room turned toward me. For the first time in 20 years, no one was laughing, no one was smirking. There was only silence and disbelief. My mother's hand began to tremble. The glass she was holding shook so badly, she nearly dropped it. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she realized that the daughter she had spent 20 years calling a disappointment had quietly been creating the ideas that others proudly claimed as their own. But the biggest surprise was still to come. The elderly man reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a white envelope. It was sealed with the company's gold insignia. He stepped toward me and placed it gently in my hands. "Ms. Evelyn Evans, I didn't come here today just to thank you." He paused. The room was completely silent. Then he said, "I came here to announce a decision, one I've been waiting 7 years to make." No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. And for the first time, my mother looked genuinely afraid. The hall fell completely silent. No one spoke. No one laughed. Every eye was locked on the white envelope. The elderly man was holding out toward me. I swallowed hard and asked, "Sir, what is this?" He smiled. "It's more than just a letter. It's the final decision of a journey that began 40 years ago." My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. I carefully opened it. Inside was an official letter, bearing the seal of the company's board of directors. I read the first line, and my breath caught. "Ms. Evelyn Evans, by the unanimous vote of the board of directors, you are hereby appointed as the founder's successor and the company's future chief executive officer, effective immediately." My hands began to shake. I read it again, then a third time. The words hadn't changed. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. People around the room stared at one another in disbelief. What? His successor? How is that even possible? My mother looked completely stunned. This has to be some kind of joke. For the first time, the elderly man spoke with complete authority. "I have never joked about the most important decision of my life." He took the microphone. The room became perfectly still. "My name is Walter Harrington. 40 years ago, I started this company with a single small store. Today, it has grown into a business with 139 locations across the Midwest. But age has finally made one thing clear. It's time for me to hand this company to someone who understands responsibility, not just authority." Then he turned toward me. "For the past 7 years, I've been evaluating just one person. That person is Evelyn Evans." Not a single person in the room made a sound. Walter continued. "Most people believe successful leaders are the ones whose names appear in newspapers. I believe they're the people who keep companies alive without ever asking for recognition." He looked directly at me. "She helped save this company, while others took the credit. She protected the jobs of dozens of employees. Without asking for applause, she turned losses into profits, without ever putting her name on the work." Tears filled my eyes, because every word was true. I had never worked for recognition. I simply did my job, one problem at a time. Walter paused for a moment. Then he smiled. "Do you know when I first noticed Evelyn?" Everyone listened in complete silence. 7 years ago, I walked into one of my own stores pretending to be an ordinary customer. The cash registers had crashed. Customers were angry. Managers were blaming each other. Only one employee stayed calm. She apologized to every customer. She helped fix the register herself. She trained new employees, while solving everyone's problems at the same time. She had no idea who I was. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. If I ever chose a successor, it would be that young woman. My mother's eyes never left my face. It was as if, for the first time in her life, she was truly seeing me. Then, in a nervous voice, she asked, "Evelyn, why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" For the first time in 20 years, I looked directly into her eyes. Then I quietly answered, "Because every time I wanted to tell you something, you had already told everyone who I was. This is my disappointing daughter, the one who never made anything of herself." The room fell silent again. My mother had no answer. Her hands slowly dropped to her sides. "Lynn," a voice echoed from the back of the hall. "Mr. Harrington, if you knew the whole truth, you'd never make her your successor." Everyone turned toward the voice. It was my cousin, Brian, my aunt's son. He was holding a thick file in his hands. A cold smile spread across his face. The kind of smile worn by someone who believed they were about to destroy another person's life. He raised the file into the air. "I have evidence that will prove Evelyn Evans should never become the next CEO of this company." My heart skipped a beat, 'cause the moment I saw that file, I recognized it. The moment Brian spoke, The hall filled with whispers once again. He stepped forward confidently. The thick black file in his hands looked like the final verdict in a courtroom. A flicker of hope appeared on my mother's face. She immediately said, "I knew it. There had to be more to the story." Brian smiled triumphantly. "That's right, Aunt Linda. Today everyone is finally going to see the real Evelyn." He walked straight up to Walter Harrington. "Mr. Harrington, the woman you've chosen as your successor has an incomplete employment history. She's left multiple companies. There have been formal complaints filed against her, and she's made decisions that cost businesses millions of dollars." The room erupted into whispers again. My aunt quietly muttered, "I always knew she couldn't be trusted." Walter Harrington accepted the file without saying a word. He opened it and began reading every page carefully. The room was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. A slow smile returned to my mother's face. She seemed convinced that everything was about to change. For nearly 5 minutes, Walter silently turned page after page. Finally, he closed the file, then calmly handed it back to Brian. Brian smiled confidently. "Well, sir, I assume you're taking back your decision now." Walter took a slow breath, then answered in an even voice, "No, just one word." But it was enough to wipe the smile from Brian's face. "What?" Walter pointed at the file. "You certainly put a lot of effort into this. But there's one problem." He paused. "I've already seen every document in that file." The room fell silent. Brian's eyes widened. What do you mean?" Walter looked directly at him. 7 years ago, when I began considering Evelyn as my successor, I hired one of the world's leading investigative firms to conduct a complete background investigation. Her education, every job she'd ever held, her financial records, her tax history, her bank accounts, even her personal character. Then he smiled at me. "Do you know what they found?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued. "Not a single act of dishonesty. Not a single lie. Not a single illegal action. Instead, at every company where Evelyn worked, she reduced losses, protected employees, and increased profits." Several guests stared at each other in disbelief. Brian stammered, "But those complaints." Walter interrupted him. "Yes, there were complaints. But you deliberately left out one very important detail." He looked Brian straight in the eyes. "Those complaints were filed by the very people whose corruption Evelyn exposed." Now every person in the room was staring at Brian. Sweat formed across his forehead. Walter pulled one report from the file. "Take this case for example. According to this investigation, Evelyn uncovered a $2 million invoice fraud at one company. The people responsible were arrested, and in retaliation, they filed a formal complaint against her." He lifted another document. "The same thing happened here, then another, and here, another, and again. One report after another. Didn't prove my guilt. They proved my integrity." My mother stood speechless, her eyes fixed on the floor. And suddenly, Walter asked Brian a question that changed everything. "Brian, where exactly did you get these confidential documents?" Brian froze. He looked away, then stammered, I. Walter's voice hardened for the first time. "This file was never available to the public. Only 3 people had authorized access. Me, my chief legal officer, and the person who illegally copied these files from our headquarters several months ago." The room went completely silent. Brian's hands began to shake. At that exact moment, the double doors opened again. 2 people walked into the hall. Both were wearing black suits. Official identification badges hung from their jackets. One of them stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Brian Matthews, We need to ask you several questions regarding the theft of confidential corporate documents. The color drained from Brian's face. For the first time, my mother stood there, completely helpless, watching the lies her own family had built begin to collapse. As the two investigators approached Brian, the room fell completely silent. Brian instinctively took a step back. "You've got the wrong person. I didn't do anything," one of the investigators replied calmly. "If that's true, then how do you explain the confidential company files we recovered from your home?" Sweat instantly formed on Brian's forehead. He glanced nervously at my mother, as if hoping she'd come to his defense. But in that moment, no one was willing to stand beside him. Walter Harrington quietly broke the silence. The truth can only stay hidden for so long. And today, it's not just Brian's secrets that are coming to light. He slowly turned toward my mother. "There's someone else's secret we need to talk about." My mother's eyes widened. "Mine?" Walter nodded. "Yes, yours." A wave of confusion swept through the room. Trying to regain her composure, my mother said, "What could I possibly have done? I've always wanted what was best for my daughter." For the first time that evening, I laughed. It wasn't the laughter of happiness. It was the sound of 20 years of pain finally breaking free. I looked at her and quietly asked, "If you really wanted the best for me, why did you spend 20 years introducing me as your disappointment?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Walter reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. "Mrs. Evans, do you remember Helen Parker?" The color drained from my mother's face. She immediately looked away. I frowned. I'd never heard that name before. Walter turned toward me. "Evelyn, Helen Parker was your high school principal 20 years ago. She arranged a full university scholarship for you." My heart began pounding. I shook my head. "I never received any scholarship letter." Walter quietly handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was an unopened letter, addressed to me, Evelyn Evans. Across the top it read, "Congratulations. You have been awarded a full university scholarship." My vision blurred with tears. I slowly looked at my mother. How? How did you end up with this letter?" She couldn't answer. Walter did. "Because it never reached you." Gasps echoed throughout the room. Walter continued. "Before Helen Parker passed away, she told me what had happened. She waited weeks for your response. When none came, she called your home." He paused. The silence was overwhelming. "Your mother answered the phone." I couldn't breathe. Walter's voice grew softer. "She told Helen, Evelyn has decided not to accept the scholarship." The words hit me like a freight train. I whispered, "I never turned it down." My voice barely escaped. Walter nodded. "We know." Then he looked directly at my mother. "The truth was, you didn't want your daughter to become more successful than you." The room was stunned. Everyone stared at my mother. Even my aunt looked horrified. Finally, after 20 years, tears rolled down my mother's face. She lowered her head. Then, in a trembling voice, she confessed, "Yes, I hid the letter." No one moved. No one spoke. Sobbing, she continued, "Every time Evelyn succeeded, people praised her. I became afraid that one day she'd outshine me. I became jealous. And little by little, I started taking away every opportunity that could make her successful." Hearing those words felt like a knife through my heart. The woman whose love I'd spent my entire life chasing had been the biggest obstacle standing in my way. Walter looked at me with quiet sympathy. "Evelyn, your failures were never really yours. Someone else kept closing every door before you could walk through it." I wiped away my tears, trying to steady my breathing. Then, Walter said something else. Something that stunned the room all over again. "And sadly, The scholarship letter wasn't the only thing your mother kept from you. He paused. She hid something else. Something far more valuable than money. Something that could have changed the course of your entire life. I stared at him, barely able to speak. What was it? Walter took a slow, deep breath. Then quietly answered. The truth. About your father's final wish. The hall was so quiet. It felt as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Walter Harrington's next words. I looked at him. My voice barely escaped. Sir. What truth? He studied me for a long moment, then spoke softly. Evelyn. Telling you this may be the hardest thing I've ever had to do. He nodded to his assistant. A few moments later, the assistant placed an old leather briefcase on the table. Time had left its mark on it. The leather was worn. The corners were faded. Walter slowly opened it. Inside were several old letters, a stack of photographs, and a closed journal. He gently picked up the journal and handed it to me. This belonged to your father. My heart skipped a beat. My father. The man I'd lost 16 years earlier in a tragic accident. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. On the very first page, I recognized his neat handwriting. If this journal ever reaches Evelyn, tell her I've always been proud of her. Tears instantly filled my eyes. All my life, I'd wanted to hear those words, but I never had the chance. Walter spoke quietly. Your father was one of my closest friends. We started our businesses at almost the same time. He talked about you constantly. He always said, one day my daughter will accomplish more than I ever could. Kept turning the pages. Every page held another memory. The day I learned to ride my first bicycle. The first academic award I ever won. The afternoon, when I was 10 years old, and organized the filing system in my father's office. He had been proud of me all along. More proud than anyone had ever allowed me to believe. And suddenly, an envelope slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. Walter picked it up. Across the front it read, "For Evelyn only." I opened it carefully. It was a legal document. I stared at it in disbelief. It was the paperwork for a trust. Walter nodded. 2 years before your father's death, he established a trust for your future. It included not only money, but also shares in his business investments. I looked up at him. Then why was I never told? Walter didn't answer immediately. Is it? He slowly turned toward my mother. Every person in the room followed his gaze. Tears streamed down her face. She struggled to speak. I told the attorney not to tell Evelyn about the trust. A collective gasp swept through the hall. My knees weakened. I slowly sank into a chair. My own mother had hidden more than a scholarship. She had hidden the last gift my father had left for me. I looked at her, barely able to speak. Why? Sobbing, she answered. Because I was afraid that if you had all of that, you wouldn't need me anymore. Closed my eyes. For 20 years, I'd begged for love, for acceptance, for approval, never realizing the person I wanted it from most needed me to stay small. Walter stepped closer. He rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. Evelyn, your father didn't just leave you a trust. He left you a letter. I looked up. Walter placed the folded letter into my hands. I slowly opened it. It read, My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer with you. There's one thing I hope you'll always remember. People will believe about you only what you first believe about yourself. If someone ever tells you that you're a failure, don't let their voice become your future. I know you'll one day make decisions far greater than anything I ever made. And when that day comes, I believe you'll choose justice over bitterness. I've always been proud of you. Love, Dad. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried. For my entire life, I'd longed to hear just one sentence. I'm proud of you. I never knew My father had written those words for me, years before he died. After a moment, Walter addressed everyone in the room. Tomorrow morning, the board of directors will hold a special meeting at our headquarters. At that meeting, Evelyn Evans will be formally appointed as my successor. Before anyone could respond, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. A young woman hurried inside. She was breathing heavily, a red file clutched tightly in her hands. "Mr. Harrington," she called, "you have to postpone the board meeting." The room turned toward her. She caught her breath, then said, "We've just uncovered evidence that someone inside the company has been stealing millions of dollars." A chill swept across the room. She placed the red file on the table. Printed across the top of the first page, in bold black letters, was a single title: Chief Financial Officer. The very man who, for the past 10 years, had been considered Walter Harrington's most trusted executive. The moment the red file hit the table, the atmosphere inside the hall changed again. Every eye turned toward the young woman. Walter Harrington looked at her seriously. "Sarah, what's going on?" Sarah was the company's chief legal officer. She was still slightly out of breath. She opened the file, then said, "Sir, about 2 hours ago our internal audit team uncovered a highly unusual transaction. At first, we assumed it was a simple accounting error. But when we reviewed the company's financial records for the past 10 years, we discovered something far more serious." Guests exchanged nervous glances. Sarah placed the first report in front of Walter. "Money has been leaving the company, little by little. Each transfer was small enough to avoid attracting attention, but over the last decade, those transfers added up to more than $60 million. A wave of shock swept through the room. $60 million? How is that possible? Walter's voice turned cold. "Who's responsible?" Sarah took a deep breath, then spoke the name. That left Walter speechless. "Mark Richardson, our chief financial officer." Walter gripped the back of a chair for support. "That's impossible. He's worked beside me for 25 years. I trusted him like a brother." Sarah nodded sadly. "I know, sir. But the evidence is overwhelming. Payments were routed through shell companies. Fake suppliers were created. Every transaction appeared completely legitimate." The room sat in stunned silence. But my attention shifted to someone else. Brian. The moment Mark's name was mentioned, panic flashed across his face. That's when I remembered something. 3 years earlier, while reviewing financial records at headquarters, I'd noticed several suspicious payments. In my report I wrote, "These expenses don't appear to be legitimate." The very next day, my report disappeared, and I was transferred to another department. The time, I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. No, everything finally made sense. I looked at Walter. "Sir, I don't think this fraud started today." He turned toward me. "You know something." He nodded. 3 years ago, I found the first warning signs. I submitted a written report, but it never reached your office." Sarah looked surprised. "Who did you submit it to?" I answered without hesitation. "The Chief Financial Officer's office." Walter slammed his hand on the table. So Mark destroyed the evidence against himself. Sarah quickly removed another document from the file. "Sir, there's something even more important." She placed the page in front of me. It was a printed email. Sender, Mark Richardson. Recipient, Brian Matthews. My hands began to tremble. The message read, "Keep Evelyn busy. If she gets access to the records again, everything falls apart. Your promised payment is secure." A wave of murmurs spread through the hall. Every eye turned toward Brian. He slowly backed away. "That's fake. Someone forged that email." Sarah answered immediately. "No. It came directly from the company's mail server." The digital signatures have already been verified. The last bit of color disappeared from Brian's face. He suddenly turned and tried to run, but the investigators standing by the entrance stopped him before he reached the door. Walter looked at him in disbelief. His voice was filled with pain. "So you weren't just stealing from my company. You were helping destroy Evelyn's life." Brian lowered his head. For the first time, he spoke quietly. "I wasn't working alone." The room went silent again. Walter's voice hardened. "Who else?" Brian hesitated. His entire body trembled. Finally he whispered, "If I tell you his name, I probably won't live long enough to leave this building." That exact moment, a black luxury sedan pulled up outside the hall. The doors opened. A man stepped out. An expensive black suit, luxury watch, and the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. Sarah's face went pale. She whispered, "Oh my God! It's Mark Richardson." He walked into the hall without hesitation, slowly scanned the room, then looked directly at me. A faint smile crossed his face, and he said only one sentence, "Evelyn, if you had stayed quiet, none of this would have happened." The doors of the hall slowly closed. Mark Richardson walked inside with complete confidence. There was no fear on his face, no panic. He looked like a man arriving at a celebration, not someone about to face criminal charges. He stopped directly in front of Walter Harrington, then smiled faintly. "Sir, you shouldn't have come here tonight." Anger flashed across Walter's face. He raised his voice. "Mark, I trusted you like a son, and this is how you repaid that trust." Mark simply shrugged. "In business, trust doesn't matter. Opportunity does." The entire hall stared at him in disbelief. He casually adjusted his tie, then looked straight at me. "And you? You've always been the biggest threat to my plans, Evelyn." I said nothing. He laughed softly. "Do you know when I first heard your name? 7 years ago. One of your recommendations saved this company millions of dollars. That was the day I realized, if you ever climbed high enough, my game would be over." Walter stared at him. "So all of this was intentional?" Mark answered without hesitation. "Every bit of it. I intercepted every report Evelyn submitted, blocked every promotion she deserved, made sure someone else received the credit. And every time she started asking questions, I had her transferred to another department." Suddenly, everything made sense. Every promotion that disappeared at the last minute, every award handed to someone else, every meeting where my name mysteriously vanished from the attendance list. None of it had been bad luck. It had all been part of Mark's plan. He smiled. "You spent years believing fate was against you. But it wasn't fate. It was me." People throughout the room looked at each other in stunned silence. Walter's voice turned icy. "And the $60 million. Mark answered calmly. "That was just business. Yes, I took money. But I also made this company billions." Sarah immediately stepped forward. "Every bank transfer has already been traced. The shell companies have been identified. The evidence against you is overwhelming." For the first time, Mark hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a small brass key on the table. "Evidence?" He smiled. "The real evidence is still in my possession." He tapped the key with his finger. "This opens a private vault. Inside are files that could send half this company's board of directors to prison." Several executives turned pale. Walter frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mark laughed. "I was never working alone. Alone. I never had to. People inside this company accepted their share in exchange for their silence." Several guests shifted uneasily in their seats. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just one man's corruption. It had infected the entire system. Then Mark looked at me again. But there was one problem. You never accepted a bribe. You never signed a false document. You never stayed silent. That's why. You could never be allowed to become the successor. I slowly walked toward him. The room became perfectly still. I stopped only a few feet away. Then quietly said, "You forgot one thing, Mark." He smiled confidently. "What's that?" I answered calmly. "You can bury the truth. But sooner or later, it always finds its way into the light." That moment, the investigators stepped forward. One of them spoke clearly. "Mark Richardson, you are under arrest for financial fraud, forgery, corporate theft, conspiracy, and destruction of evidence." Mark didn't resist. "Is it?" He looked directly at me, smiled, and quietly said, "You think you've won. The real game hasn't even started." I frowned. "What do you mean?" His smile widened. "The vault doesn't just contain company secrets. It contains the truth about your family. A truth that will make it impossible for you to ever forgive your mother." Then he fell silent. The investigators escorted him toward the exit. I remained standing where I was. Only one question echoed through my mind. What secret had my mother been hiding from me all these years? Walter Harrington walked over to me. His expression was solemn. Then he quietly said, "Evelyn, tomorrow morning, we're opening that vault." He paused, then looked me in the eyes. "And when we do, the last lie of your life will finally come to an end." The next morning, a special meeting of the board of directors was held. On the 12th floor of the company's headquarters. Only a handful of people were present. Walter Harrington, the company's attorneys, the investigators, me. In the center of the conference room sat a reinforced steel vault, the very same vault whose key Mark Richardson had placed on the table before his arrest. Walter looked at me. His voice was calm. "Evelyn, whatever we find today will change everything forever." I silently nodded. The key turned. The vault clicked open. Inside were dozens of files, several hard drives, and one white envelope. Across the front, only 3 words were written. "For Evelyn only." My hands trembled once again. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter. It was written in Mark Richardson's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I've lost. But there's something you deserve to know. I may have destroyed your career, but I wasn't the one who started it." I looked up at Walter. He quietly said, "Finish reading." I lowered my eyes back to the page. 15 years ago, your mother came to my office. She told me you were exceptionally talented. She feared that if you ever rose through the company, people would respect you more than they respected her. She asked me for one favor: never let you stand out. First I refused. But years later, after my corruption began, you became the greatest threat to everything I had built. Then I remembered her request, and I made sure every promotion, every opportunity, and every recognition was kept away from you. The letter slipped from my fingers. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't believe it. My mother's fear had become someone else's weapon. That moment, the conference room door slowly opened. My mother walked inside. She looked older than she had just one day before. Her face was filled with regret. She slowly approached me. For the first time in my life, she folded her hands before me. "Evelyn, I don't even deserve to ask for your forgiveness." I remained silent. Through tears she continued, "I never truly believed you were a disappointment. I simply lost a battle against my own fears. I thought that if you became more successful than me, I'd be left completely alone. That fear turned me from a loving mother into a selfish person." The room remained silent. I looked at her for several moments, then quietly said, "Do you know something? I never needed money. I never needed a title. There was only one thing I ever wanted." I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Just once, I wanted to hear you say, "I'm proud of you." My mother broke down completely. Sobbing, she whispered, "I am proud of you, Evelyn. I always have been. I was simply too afraid to say it." Closed my eyes. Wounds can be forgiven, but their scars never disappear. I watched her cry, then quietly answered, "I don't hate you, but I want to live the rest of my life without carrying hatred. So, I forgive you, but from this day forward, I choose my own path." My mother lowered her head and silently took a seat. Walter Harrington stood. He unfolded an official document, then read the resolution aloud. Effective immediately. Evelyn Evans is hereby appointed Chief Executive Officer of Harrington Retail Group, and the official successor to its founder. The room erupted in applause. I looked toward the ceiling. Only one person filled my thoughts. My father. For just a moment, it felt as though I could hear his voice. "I told you, sweetheart. I've always been proud of you." Epilogue. Sometimes, people spend years calling you by a name. That was never your truth. But one day, your hard work, your character, and your integrity will speak louder than every lie ever told about you. And when that day comes, you won't need to prove your worth to anyone, because the world itself will bear witness that even the quietest person can become the hero of their own story. If you enjoyed this story, and you love emotional family dramas filled with betrayal, justice, redemption, success, and unforgettable twists, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video, comment below with your thoughts and where you're watching from, and share it with your friends and family. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more powerful stories like this every week. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next story.